All right, welcome back to Doctrines 3 as we continue on our study of angels, church, and end times. As we continue on in angelology, we're going to talk a little bit about the named angels, who the various angels that have names in Scripture. And surprisingly, it's actually quite few. Let's talk about a couple of them to begin with here. We already mentioned in the last video, Michael, the archangel, is described in Daniel chapter 10, Daniel chapter 12, and again in Jude 9. The name Michael only simply means who is like God. In other words, implying that there is no one like God, and identifies the only one classified as the archangel in Scripture. Revelation chapter 12 also identifies him as the defender of Israel who will wage war on behalf of Israel against Satan and his hordes in the tribulation. In fact, it's Michael that we see opposing Satan in many places. We see him in Jude chapter 9 opposing Satan over the body of Moses. But Michael refrained from his own judgment and saying, I'm not going to dispute Satan myself, but rather saying God himself will judge Satan. And by the way, for those of you who think that I may have made a mistake saying Jude chapter 9, I had an old professor that once said, actually, those books of the Bible that only have one chapter and many verses, he said actually the initial division of the books was only into chapters and not into verses, and the chapters came first, and that when these books were divided, they were divided into what we would call verses, and initially they were called chapters. So every once in a while I slip up and I say Jude chapter 9, but technically it's not actually wrong. But anyway, that may just be an excuse. Jehovah's Witnesses and some Christians identify Michael in these passages as Christ himself. This view, however, would suggest Christ has then less authority than Satan in Jude 9, which certainly is untenable. It's not something we want to even think about. And it really is a shaky identification, since there's nowhere else that specifically calls Michael Jesus Christ himself. The next named angel is Gabriel. We see him in Daniel chapter 9, Luke chapter 1. We see him in several other places as well. But let's talk about this. His name means man of God, or God is strong, or God is strength. And we see him several different places, and he seems to be God's special messenger of his kingdom program in each of the 4 times he appears in the biblical record. He reveals and interprets God's purpose and program concerning the Messiah and his kingdom to the prophets and people of Israel. We see him in the book of Daniel, for instance, revealing to Daniel the 70 weeks prophecy, which indicates the timing of the birth of Christ. And in Luke, of course, we see him as revealing to not only Zechariah and Elizabeth, or specifically to Zacharias, the birth of John the Baptist, who will be the herald of the Messiah, but then also to Mary herself in the birth of Jesus Christ. Now, also understand that Gabriel is not named in Luke chapter 2 as the one who reveals it to the shepherds, but whether it is or not isn't really important. It could be him, it might not be him. Really doesn't, because the Bible doesn't say. Doesn't really help us to try to identify him there. Only really where he is specifically named. In Daniel chapter 9, in a highly significant passage, Gabriel explains the events of those 70 weeks for Israel, not only leading up to the advent of the Messiah. In fact, when we get into eschatology, we'll see that that particular prophecy is very specific and leads us directly up to from the decree to rebuild the walls, which comes in Nehemiah, to the point at which the Messiah is presented to Israel in the triumphal entry, is exactly the correct number of days between those two events in Daniel's prophecy. Then the 70th week, then being 7-year period, is where we get the 7-year tribulation. So again, Gabriel giving us that detailed information concerning the coming of the kingdom. and the Messiah. In Luke chapter 1, we see him being the one who's speaking to Mary and giving her the information that her son would be the one to take the rule of the throne of David. And in Daniel chapter 8, we see Gabriel explaining to Daniel the succeeding kingdoms of Medo-Persia and Greece, as well as the untimely death of Alexander the Great, that would then lead to the Roman Empire and then eventually the kingdom of Jesus Christ himself. Gabriel also is the one who announces the birth of John the Baptist to Zacharias. Of course, John the Baptist being the herald of Jesus Christ. Again, always pertaining to the announcing of the kingdom and the Messiah. The third named angel is himself not really an angel. We'll be talking about him more extensively next week, and that's Lucifer. And he's only named one time as Lucifer the angel in Isaiah chapter 14 and verse 12. His name actually means shining one or star of the morning or morning star, which doesn't really give us a lot of information, and it very well could just simply be that this term is not necessarily a name, but rather a description of Satan as a bright shining star, because in Isaiah and in Ezekiel, which we'll see next week, Lucifer or Satan as an angel was of the primary angels. He was of the highest order and was very beautiful. He may have been the wisest and most beautiful of all of God's created beings, who was originally placed in a position of authority over the cherubim surrounding the throne of God. But like I said, next week we'll really get into the origin and nature of Satan. Those are the only three named angels in the Bible. If you know any other names, most likely it comes from either Mormonism, which gives us several other named angels, or Catholicism, which gives us several other named angels, none of which are named in our scriptures that we have today. That's all we have for this video. We'll look forward to seeing you in the next.